They called him a disgrace when he told them who he was, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he dared to live honestly. Logan Pierce came out at 19, trembling but determined, thinking that honesty would finally buy him a place at the table. Instead, it earned him a place in exile. Now, nearly a decade later, he stood at the edge of the same family home by the lake in Vermont, where his childhood summers had played out like gentle films, barefoot on the dock canoe races with cousins, pancakes made by Grandpa Elliot. Every Sunday morning, Logan returned not with grand expectations, but with a small suitcase, a photograph of him and his grandfather framed in driftwood, and a heart that had learned to survive on its own. He hadn't been invited to the memorial. The family had posted it casually online. No one had reached out, but this was still his grandfather too. Still the man who once said, "You don't have to be like them to be part of this family. You just have to love honest." Logan stepped onto the driveway and barely took a breath before the door slammed shut. The sound cracked louder than the frost beneath his feet. His cousin's voice echoed through the glass, mocking, almost gleeful. "We told you don't come here." Then a force from behind sent him tumbling down the stone steps, suitcase flipping open, the photograph clattering onto the gravel. On the porch stood his mother, arms crossed tight, face carved in disapproval. "Don't stain this house with your life," she said. "You made your choice a long time ago. We've all moved on." She didn't say the word, but he knew what she meant. Gay, that was the stain. That was the choice. As if loving someone the way his heart was built to love was a betrayal, not a birthright. Logan didn't plead. Not anymore. He gathered his things in silence and stepped away. Inside, he could see the soft flicker of candlelight, the family seated in warmth and laughter, passing dishes and stories, as if the boy who once carved his name into the dock rail with a pocket knife had never existed. He spent that night alone in his car, parked under the shadow of the house that once raised him. The air was cold enough to fog the windows, his breath short and trembling. From across the frozen lake, the porch lights glowed like distant stars, bright, unreachable. He wrapped himself in a coat too thin for this kind of weather and clutched the photo frame like a compass. In the corner, Grandpa Elliot's eyes crinkled with joy, a joy that once said, "You don't have to hide." By morning, the ache wasn't just in his body. It sat in his chest, years thick. He hadn't just been cut off from blood, he'd been cut off from memory. His queerness wasn't just rejected, it had been rewritten out of the family story altogether. At the last family gathering he dared to attend, someone asked if he'd found a nice girl yet. And when he told them calmly that he hadn't dated girls since high school, the air changed. His uncle pushed back his chair. His father didn't say a word. His mother left the room. That was the last day Logan stood inside the house. He thought time would change things. It didn't. It only made their silence more permanent. He stayed one more night by the lake, this time not out of hope but defiance. He watched the same stars he once pointed to beside his grandfather. He remembered the summer Elliot gave him a rainbow pin and whispered, "You wear this if you want to." I wore one too once, not out loud, but I wish I had. No one in the family knew about that moment. They never asked. And now they were inside mourning a man who had accepted Logan for exactly who he was, while denying that version of him ever existed. But Logan did exist, and he had returned not to seek forgiveness, but to reclaim something that had always been his. Not just the house, but the right to stand in it as a whole person. They thought they had locked him out, but there were doors in that house they had no idea he still had the keys to. This is just the beginning. If you believe stories like this matter, stories where LGBTQ+ people don't just survive, but return stronger, prouder, and unafraid, then follow Heart Stories. Here we honor those who were pushed out, but never truly left. By the third morning, Logan was ready to leave. His fingers were stiff from the cold. His heart was colder still. He sat behind the wheel of his car, parked beneath the pines, staring one last time at the house across the clearing. He told himself it wasn't surrender, just self-preservation. There was no point staying where no one even acknowledged his presence, where his name was spoken like a curse, and his face was met with turned shoulders. Vermont had been his childhood haven, but now it felt like a ghost town with too many living people. He was halfway through packing the trunk when he heard his name. Logan, soft but certain spoken, like a question that already knew the answer. He turned. Standing there was a man in a brown wool coat, older, with snow in his beard and a stack of folders under his arm. The man introduced himself as Edward Grant. He was Logan's grandfather's lawyer. They walked down to the edge of the dock, far from the house, just wind and pine needles to hear them. Edward opened a leather folder and slid out a document, a codicil, an addendum to Elliot Pierce's will, dated a few months before his death, witness notarized valid, and then the words Logan Pierce, sole legal trustee and guardian of the Pierce family lake property, and it is contents effective upon the death of Elliot James Pierce. Logan didn't speak. He couldn't. Edward kept going. He made the change after moving out of the main house, said he couldn't take the way they were treating you or him. He never stopped talking about you, Logan. Said you were the only one who saw him as a person in those final months. That was what broke him. Not the legal revelation, not the signature, but the memory. 3 months before Elliot died, Logan had quietly cared for him in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Chicago. The family never visited. They had written both of them off, Logan for being gay and Elliot for defending him. The old man had grown weak fast. Cancer didn't wait for apologies. Logan remembered folding his grandfather's flannel shirts, warming soup, reading aloud from old lake journals. And the day Elliot took Logan's hand, frail and shaking, and whispered, "The house is yours, kiddo. You kept my heart beating longer than it wanted to." But none of that made it into the family story. When Elliot died, they told everyone he'd passed peacefully at the lake house, surrounded by loved ones. A lie. The obituary didn't mention Logan at all. Edward hesitated, then added something else. The property had been placed in a trust. Logan was the sole executor. The family had no legal rights to it, not the land, not the furniture, not even the canoe docked under the boathouse. Not unless Logan gave it to them, and he wouldn't. Not anymore. Logan stared at the page, his name in bold print. Not as a footnote, but as a pillar. For years they called him broken, ungrateful, ashamed of the family. They said he would never be part of something lasting. That love between two men was a phase, a sin, a sadness waiting to happen. But here it was legal, permanent, irrefutable proof that the man who had built the house from the ground up, the only man who had ever truly seen Logan, chose him, not just as an heir, but as a continuation of something sacred. That night, Logan didn't sleep in the car. He booked a cabin at a nearby inn, cleaned up and stared at himself in the mirror longer than usual. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like someone begging to be accepted. He felt like someone who had been entrusted with something worth protecting. He kept the news to himself, for now. Let them laugh, let them pretend he was just a trespasser. Let them cling to their stories. Their smug little circle of grief where queerness never existed and love only counted if it fit their mold. Logan had spent too many years trying to belong to a family that had no space for people like him. But maybe the lake house wasn't meant to be theirs anymore. Maybe it was meant to become something else, something better. And when he returned, he wouldn't knock. He'd use the key. Logan returned at dawn, not with apology, not with fear, but with a folder tucked under his arm, a quiet purpose in every step, and the calm certainty of someone who no longer asked to be let in. The front yard was already filled with cars. A second gathering, more food, more stories, more edits to a legacy that did not belong to them. Logan walked across the lawn, the frost still crisp beneath his boots. This time no one pushed him, no one shouted yet, but the silence was heavier than noise. He stopped at the porch, unfolded the document Edward had given him, and laid it carefully on the wooden table near the entry. Then he rang the bell. When the door opened, it was his aunt. She blinked once, then again as if seeing a ghost. "You need to leave," she hissed. "I'm home," Logan said softly, "and I have every right to be here." Voices rose inside like a wave gathering force. His cousin barged to the front, grabbed the folder and skimmed it. His jaw tensed, his hand trembled. Then with a sudden rage that came from somewhere old and bitter, he raised his arm and smashed the frame Logan was carrying. The same picture of him and Grandpa Elliot on the dock now shattered into a dozen shards at his feet. "You tricked him," the cousin spat. "You waited until he was senile and made him sign whatever you wanted. You're a damn manipulator." Logan's mother appeared in the hallway. One look at the paper and her face collapsed into something colder than hate denial. "He wouldn't have done this," she said. "Not for someone like you." Logan didn't flinch. "He did. Because I was there when no one else was, because I never stopped loving him, even after you all erased us both." It only escalated from there. His uncle accused him of forging the documents. His aunt threatened legal action claiming elder abuse. One of the younger cousins started filming, muttering, "Wait till the whole town sees what this freak is pulling." And then someone screamed. His mother had collapsed to the floor, clutching her chest. It was an act, Logan knew it. She had done the same thing at his coming out dinner years ago, right after he'd said the word boyfriend. as if his truth were a personal attack, a heart attack waiting to happen. And once again, everyone rushed to her, ignoring the debris at Logan's feet, ignoring the facts laid bare on the table. Later that evening, the sheriff came, not to investigate the property, but because someone had accused Logan of trespassing. It took an hour, the lawyer on speakerphone, and 2 notarized copies of the trust documents to prove the opposite. Logan wasn't trespassing, the others were. The family's panic turned into something darker. That night, as Logan returned to sleep in the cabin he had quietly reopened, a rock shattered one of the windows. On the wood panel outside in red spray paint were the words, "Get out, sodomite." He stared at it for a long time, not with fear, with recognition. They weren't just angry he'd inherited the house. They were furious he was still standing, that someone they tried so hard to shame, so hard to disappear, had come back. Not only alive, but stronger, that a gay man, their gay relative, had been deemed worthy by the very man whose approval they'd all chased. This wasn't just about property. It was about power, about control over a narrative that Logan no longer accepted. For years, they told him his love made him less, that who he was made him broken, that the way he held another man's hand disqualified him from family traditions, from holiday dinners, from inheritance. But the truth was clearer than ever. They were the ones who walked away from family. He was the one who stayed with it until the end. Logan called the glazier the next morning to replace the broken glass. Then he called the locksmith. And then, without asking anyone's permission, he changed every lock in the house. He wasn't leaving. He had the keys now. The first thing Logan did after changing the locks was stand in the middle of the living room and listen to the silence. It wasn't the kind that made you feel alone. It was the kind that made space for breath, for ownership, for truth. He spent the next 2 days cleaning, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, reclamation. Every picture frame, every mug left behind, every drawer full of brittle family photos. He touched them all. He moved through the house like someone relearning a language he used to speak fluently, now speaking it in his own dialect. In the attic, he found a box labeled Elliot Personal. Inside, journals, lake maps, and a worn envelope with a Polaroid of Logan at age 12 beaming with a rainbow kite overhead. On the back, in his grandfather's handwriting, "My boy flies higher than they'll ever understand." Logan cried in that attic, not because of grief, but because of what it meant to be seen that clearly by someone now gone. But tears weren't enough. Not anymore. The attack, the slur scrawled across his cabin wall, had done something. It cracked the final layer of restraint. For years, Logan had tried to move gently, to prove he was harmless, to be palatable, but palatable had never protected him, and now he was done apologizing for existing. He contacted his lawyer and filed a countersuit against the family for harassment, vandalism, and unlawful attempts to seize illegally transferred trust, is said. Then he filed a police report for the hate speech. But more than that, he decided to go public. He took a deep breath and wrote the post. "I was called a disgrace, a stain, a threat to tradition. They told me I didn't belong here, but I was the one who held my grandfather's hand when he passed. I was the one who cleaned him, fed him, laughed with him in his final days when they had already erased him. I am gay. I am his grandson, and I inherited this house, not just legally, but with love. And now I'm building something here they could never understand." He uploaded the post along with a series of photos, him as a child at the lake, him and Elliot eating popsicles on the porch, and finally him standing outside the house, now paint bucket in hand, replacing the hateful words with a mural of blue and green strokes. Above it, he wrote, "This house stands for those they tried to erase." The post went viral. It spread far beyond Vermont. Within a week, an LGBTQ+ nonprofit from the neighboring county reached out. They had heard about what happened. They asked if he needed support. Logan invited them to visit that weekend. 12 queer teens and young adults arrived in carpools and vans. They walked the shoreline, stood under the old pines, and cried when Logan told them, "I'm not here to save anyone, but this house, it's yours too if you need it." He turned the guest bedrooms into art spaces. The back shed became a canoe workshop. The upstairs loft, once filled with dust and boxes, became a quiet reading room with a small rainbow flag in the window. Kids came to write, to draw, to sleep in peace. Some had been kicked out. Some had never even said their name out loud before. One night, a girl named Andy handed Logan a charcoal sketch of the lake. She had drawn him too, standing by the dock, arms open. "You made this place feel like summer," she said, "even though it's snowing." In that moment, Logan understood what legacy meant. Not just a house or a trust fund, not something etched in stone or notarized on paper. Legacy was healing what had been broken. By choosing to stop passing pain forward, the neighbors who once avoided him began waving. Some came by to offer tools. Others apologized quietly. The silence had shifted for so long. Logan had fought to be included in a family that weaponized tradition against him. But here in the laughter of queer teens paddling across the lake, in the smell of paint and new stories blooming from old walls, he found a different kind of family, a chosen one. The courtroom was quiet when the judge read the verdict. Not a gasp, not a whisper, just the steady scratching of pens and the low hum of a space where truth had finally overtaken noise. The family's lawsuit was dismissed in full. All claims of coercion, manipulation, and elder abuse were deemed baseless. The trust remained intact. Logan Pierce was confirmed as the sole legal executor of the lake property, its assets, and all future decisions tied to it. Outside the courthouse, snow fell in slow spirals. Logan stood on the steps alone, not triumphant, just still. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat. Victory, when you've spent years being erased, doesn't taste like revenge, it tastes like breathing. His phone buzzed, a message from Andy, a photo of the mural back at the lake house. Someone had added a line beneath it in clean black paint: "You can't evict love." By the time Logan returned to the lake, spring had begun to whisper through the trees. The ice was melting along the edges of the dock. Wild grass peeked through snow. He opened the front door slowly, like you open a chapter you've read 100 times but never quite understood. The hallway smelled of cedar and fresh paint. On the dining table lay a small, unexpected object, a wooden box hand-carved with initials burned into its lid. EJP. It hadn't been there before. Logan lifted the lid gently. Inside, a folded letter, yellowed but clean. A photograph of Elliot and Logan at 17, arms over shoulders, smiles crooked but radiant. And a note to my daughter: if you ever find your way back to the truth, give this to him. He deserves to know he was never the disgrace. He was the light. The letter had been meant for his mother. Logan stepped out onto the porch, and there she was, standing at the bottom of the steps. She looked smaller than he remembered. Not older, just reduced by time, by guilt, by everything she had refused to say when it still mattered. She didn't speak, only extended the box with both hands. Then, as if the act alone had said all she could manage, she turned and walked away, her figure folding back into the mist of the trees. He didn't call after her. Some wounds don't need closure, some need distance. Logan sat on the wooden steps for a long time. Then he opened the letter and read his grandfather's words again and again, each sentence like a hand on his shoulder. Don't let them dim your light. That light is the only thing keeping this house from sinking into the dark. That evening, Logan unlocked the main door and hung a new sign across the archway, handcrafted from lake driftwood, sealed in sunlight: the Lake House of Elliot Pierce. For all who were left behind, he opened the windows. Let the air move through every room. Let it carry the sound of water, of laughter, of music played without shame. Later that month, they held the first summer workshop for LGBTQ youth at the house. There were dance lessons in the living room, spoken word under the stars. One night, a trans boy from upstate stood on the dock and said, "I didn't know a place like this could exist for people like us." And Logan smiled, not as someone who had won, but as someone who had survived and turned survival into sanctuary. This wasn't just about reclaiming a house, it was about rewriting inheritance. Not in blood, but in belonging. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of legacy that outlives all the rest. Would you have stayed, or would you have walked away forever? Tell us what you would have done in Logan's place. For more powerful, real, and emotional stories, where LGBTQ+ voices rise above silence, follow heart stories. Because every heart, especially the ones told to hide, deserves to be heard.